together to produce an ever greater abundance of material and spiritual values for all. That is the secret of American prosperity.
To summarize the relationship, North American influence over Latin America was driven by an ambition to control the region and its wealth, in order to have access to resources that would make it possible for the U.S. to compete in other world powers on the global stage. This was done through a division of labor that heavily favored North America and put the Latin Americans in a perpetual disadvantage. The U.S. would harvest raw materials and natural resources, as well as setting up industries in South American countries, such as the United Fruit Company in Guatemala. At the same time, Latin American countries would import industrialized goods from the United States. This dynamic had many long-lasting consequences on the region. The dependence on the North made it very hard for Latin American states to develop their own industries and move away from having to import modern products. In addition to the fact that Latin American working class also heavily depended on the U.S. factories in their countries for work, which meant they were powerless in trying to negotiate better working conditions for themselves.
We see this as early as 1823 with the Monroe Doctrine. This declaration stated that the U.S. would not allow European countries to expand their control over territories in Latin America, and this was later supported by the British. In fact, it was the fear of the British Navy that kept European countries such as France and Spain from further attempting to expand their influence over Latin America. The U.S. even insisted that France pull out their troops from Mexico or face the possibility of war. And since France did not want to have a conflict with both Mexican and American troops, they chose to withdraw from the region. The primary reason the U.S. wanted to expand its influence in foreign countries like Latin America was this economic industrialization that happened in the late 1800s that increased their need to trade with other countries, as they had mass production and produced more products than they needed in the U.S. Latin America presented the perfect market for this trade relation, along with its own abundant resources that were available for extraction.
When we look at mining in Latin America as a whole, we can see many long-term trends and effects. Modern technologies and equipment changed the mining landscape in Latin America in the 1960s, leading to a leap in the scale of production, but also environmentally devastating the region. This was intensified by national development strategies, which promoted the construction of industrial complexes as spin-offs from the mines. You can see this very clearly with the case with the massive oil deposits developed in Tabasco and Chiapas in Mexico in the 1970s, where the government expropriated agricultural lands for mining operations. Over the course of 10 years, Villahermosa, which was once a small river town, had refineries, ports, pipelines, and almost 1 million people. Air pollution continued with the filtration of contaminated water, resulted in the reduced fertility of the remaining farmland. In addition, after a few years of vegetation had been completely damaged by nitric acid rain, which originated in the sulfur and nitrate emissions from the refinery.
Although the U.S. was heavily involved in the Latin American mining industry, there was much resistance from the people of Latin America to U.S. involvement, especially the miners themselves. In 1952, Bolivian miners led the nationalization of tin mining by urging the government to seize the largest mines without paying compensation to the U.S. government. However, the Bolivian government officials feared the U.S. reaction to this, partly due to the Cold War, which caused the U.S. to be more alarmed about leftist influence among the Bolivian revolutionaries, and saw the nationalization as a threat to American economy interest. Chile had a similar resistance during the 1960s when the Union demanded increased the state's control over major U.S. copper companies, which concluded in 1971 with the nationalization of this sector. Similar to the miners in Bolivia, Chilean miners played a revolutionary role and associated and assisted Allende to an electoral victory. In the 1960s, copper miners mounted more and more strikes against the US companies that operated the largest mines. Once Allende had taken the office, the miners rejoiced when Fidel Castro appeared at the Chiquicamata mine, which is currently the biggest open pit copper mine in the world and the biggest proven copper reserves. These events highlights the importance of mining in fighting against the US government and nationalizing natural resources in South America, which is a significant source of income for all countries in the region.
I think looking at the mining industry overall, from the first point of contact with the industry to Hamid's personal experience with the industry in 2015, I think we can see that the issue is not only not improving, but it's also getting worse. And I think that a lot of that has to do with when the mining industries and other economic industries first came into Latin America, there was this belief that it would be a good idea and it would help the people, and there was an initial resistance. However, after decades of actually living it, not only has it hurt the economy, but it's hurt the livelihoods of the people, and they are not benefiting from it. It is decreasing their livelihoods, and I think the main thing we can get from that is that although these industries are necessary for the economies of these countries, what the people want is to nationalize it and remove foreign intervention. And I think that the current problem right now, the struggle, is that foreign investors do not want to leave, and you can't completely remove the industry. So I think this week's whole discussion between commerce and coercion and America's influence, I think what we came to found was that commerce and coercion come hand in hand when there is a kind of dependence like Latin America does have on foreign industries. And you really can't have equal commerce between these two powers since there's such a power dynamic imbalance.
So in order to kind of conclude what we talked about, I can talk about my own personal experience that I went to Colombia last summer to work with local communities to talk about, to lead them so the situation would improve and the Canadian mining companies can go and work there. However, since then, and with the lots of effort that we put in these projects, it hasn't worked well, and the situation is not improving. And as of like 5 months ago, 5 or 6 security guards in the region got killed by locals as a form of resistance, that they don't want these companies to go and work there. So we can see that this resistance is keep going on, and we are all seeking for a solution that can hopefully help the region and also help the foreign countries to go there and invest and improve the situation.
Working together to produce an ever greater abundance of material and spiritual values for all. That is the secret of American prosperity.